What's up? My name's Jake, and today I'm going to be talking about my Kaldheim-Only Angels deck. So today's commander of the day is Firja, Judge of Valor. She's an Angel Cleric from Kaldheim, and what she does is she's a 5-mana orzhov 2/4 with flying and lifelink, where whenever you cast your second spell, it's another second spell commander, you look at the top 3 cards, put one of them in your hand, and mill 2. So she's got card draw, she's got mill. That's actually a pretty good package for an uncommon. So as we get into it, let me talk about what I wanted the deck to do. And that's really use the graveyard in a way that is designed to fill it as fast as possible without losing too much momentum. Within Kaldheim, there's not great card draw, and there's not great ramp when we're only using cards from one set. We have our Soul Ring, we have our Arcane Signet, but like we have a Marble Diamond that comes in tapped. So just in terms of paying for these really expensive angel cards, it can be a little bit difficult. And that's kind of where recursion comes in. So that's the first category that I want to look at. So with recursion, we have 6 different cards that we're going to be focusing on. So we have Ascent of the Worthy. It's a 3-mana uncommon. The first 2 modes, you choose a creature, and basically it becomes a bullet monkey. It just soaks all the damage that would be dealt. Two creatures you control. So it's basically pulling all the damage off of some of your more important creatures and focusing it onto the other. But the last is the most important. The last part of the saga is you return a creature card from the graveyard to the battlefield from your graveyard. It's an Angel Warrior in addition to its other types. That's mildly important just because there's a few cards in here that have kind of Angels Matters. The next card is Cleaving Reaper. She's our first Angel Berserker. First Angel we're looking at besides the Commander, but she's a Berserker. 5-mana 5/3 with Flying and Trample, and she's just a self-recursion. She just brings herself back. So great if you mill her. It's fine if she dies. Haunting Voyage is one of my favorite cards from Kaldheim. It's just mass recursion. Sorry, you recur 2 spells, but if you're foretelling it, then you're recurring all creature cards of a specific type. Obviously, it's 1 mana more to foretell, but that's not a huge deal when we're talking about the difference between 2 and potentially 10 creature cards. Marshal's Anthem is nothing new. It's nothing new with Kaldheim, and it's nothing new just in terms of how many times it's been reprinted. But it's a +1/+1 Anthem, and then any time that it's kicked, you're just recurring that many number of creatures from your graveyard. Raise the Draugr is a little bit of a modal spell, so you can either return target creature card from the graveyard to your hand, or you can return 2 creature cards that share a type from your graveyard to your hand. So generally speaking, it's going to be recurring 2, but there are a couple cards in here that aren't angels, such as Sun Titan. And so being able to choose just one specifically can be kind of helpful if you need that card. So the last card is Sun Titan. You should recognize this card, but if you don't, whenever it ETBs or attacks, you just recur a card that is 3 mana or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So I believe everything but Raise the Draugr in this recursion puts the card directly on the battlefield, which is important because we're not trying to cast these really expensive, 6 mana angels. The next category I want to talk about are some of the wild cards of the deck within this counter section. So Hero of Bredegard is a human warrior. Whenever you exile 1 or more cards from your hand and or permanents from the battlefield, you put that many +1/+1 counters on Hero of Bredegard. Within the deck, there are a number of protection spells, and these protection spells exile cards. So you're blinking them, basically. So these all pump Hero of Bredegard and turn her into an angel with flying, and then inevitably a god with indestructible. It's a really strong card. You just need some time. That's kind of a theme within the deck, is the deck just needs some time. Resplendent Marshal is a 3-mana 3/3. It's a mythic that whenever it enters the battlefield or dies, you may exile another creature card from your graveyard. So we're starting to use the graveyard as a resource. This is something that you would want to do very sparingly because you're trying to pull cards out. But let's just say, there is a Hero of Bredegard in your graveyard and you can't recur it because it's a human warrior and you're using angel keywords. Resplendent Marshal, that's a great target for it. Lastly, Youthful Valkyrie. Has flying. It's a 2-mana 1/3 where whenever another angel enters the battlefield under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on Youthful Valkyrie. It's a $14 card for an uncommon. Here's where kind of the sub-theme of the deck comes in. So with protection, like I said before, you're doing a lot of exiling with many of these. If not exiling, you're bouncing it from your graveyard when something dies. And so whenever stuff is exiled and then comes back, it's blinking in, but that's causing it to enter the battlefield again. And so you're getting your enter the battlefield trigger. You're getting basically protection if something's being targeted. So it's kind of a 2 birds with 1 stone. And there's just a couple different kind of obvious protection spells in here that you might recognize, but some actually really solid ones from Kaldheim. So Cosmic Intervention is something would be put into the graveyard from the battlefield this turn, exile it instead, and then just return any and all permanents under their control, under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So if there's a board wipe, you can cast Cosmic Intervention. As long as those cards aren't being exiled, you're getting those cards back at the end of your turn, and that's basically all creatures. If it's creatures and artifacts and enchantments, Cosmic Intervention would bring back all of those. Demonic Gifts is a nice bounce from the graveyard. Eerie Interlude is similar to Cosmic Intervention, and the only difference being it's a little bit more of a sandbox where it's any cards you're choosing, so they don't have to die. You're not worried about this card has to die first and then someone tries to exile stuff. You just get to do this in a blink. Ghostly Prison is here partly because it's a good card, and you need time with this deck, and you need time to build your graveyard. So with Ghostly Prison, that's going to buy you the time you need. Glorious Protector is great because when it ETBs, you can exile any number of non-angel creatures you control until it leaves the battlefield. So this is kind of here in a way to blink something under her, and then you blink her so those things come back. So a little bit of shenanigans with Glorious Protector. It's a little bit of work to make her work, but is in here just because she fits within the strategy of that. In my previous video, Halvar, God of Battle, was in there basically only because of, in my first video of this series, Halvar was here for only his front half because of auras and specifically equipments. That's not so much the case here. We want the backside sort of the realms. Whenever a equipped creature dies, return it to its owner's hand. So it's mostly here so that we're just not losing creatures, because pretty much every creature is valuable in this deck, and the +2/+0 plus vigilance just aren't bad. Restoration Angel is a classic. When it ETBs, you may exile non-angel creature you control. Then it returns to the battlefield under your control. Just blink. So this is, again, for those ETBs, and Swiftfoot Boots are Swiftfoot Boots. They're in the Commander Precon. Lightning Greaves are not. So back to Restoration Angel. Exile target non-angel creature you control. So what might we want to be exiling with her ability? Well, there's one main target that we want to be exiling, and I don't usually include them in decks because I'd rather just play what I draw, but because our card draw is so bad and this fits so well in the deck, the main target we're going to try and hit with Restoration Angel would be the Burning Rune Demon. When it ETBs, you tutor for 2 cards not named Burning Rune Demon. You reveal them, an opponent chooses one, put it into your hand, and then the other goes into the graveyard. So you get a toolbox. You get a card to hand, basically card draw, and then a card in your graveyard that you're going to recur later. So this is the optimal card to be blinking, just in general, but especially with Restoration Angel, because it's non-angel creatures. And this is a Demon Berserker. There's an underlying subcategory of creature types in here too for Berserkers. So Burning Rune Demon is one of the better cards in the deck. Just continuing down to tutors. Pyre of Heroes, because we're using our graveyard, is useful. Whenever you can pay 2 and tap it to sacrifice a creature, and then you search your library for a creature card that shares a creature type. So sack a weak angel that costs little, or maybe some humans, and then you put that card onto the battlefield and shuffle your library. So this is here is just kind of pseudo card draw. It's just to get stuff onto the battlefield faster. It's a little bit specific, just in that it has to be mana cost equal to 1 plus that CMC, but it is usable. It's just a little bit tricky. Search for Glory is a snow sorcery. All of the basic lands in this deck are snow lands. So you search your library for a snow permanent card, a legendary, or a saga. Reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle, and you gain 1 life for each snow mana spent to cast a spell. So because everything is snow mana, you can pay 3. You would gain 3 life, and it's a tutor. The last tutor is Varragoth Bloodsky Sire. It's a really cool card from Kaldheim. It's got Death Touch, and then you can boast after you attack and pay 2, and search your library for a card, put it on top of it, and then you know what you're getting next. You could also do this for an opponent. I don't know why you would, but it's an option. We've got a couple different tokens in the deck. I mentioned Berserkers. So Rise of the Dreadmarn, you create X 2/2 Black Zombie Berserker creature tokens, where X is the number of non-token creatures that die this turn. So in the removal category, we've got several. I think we've got 4 or 5 board wipes. So board wipe into a 3-mana Rise of the Dreadmarn, or you can foretell it, which is a cool mechanic. Like if you haven't looked at Kaldheim's cards, foretell is is really cool, and I should have talked about it sooner. But foretell is during your turn you can pay 2 and exile it, cast it later for its foretell cost. So rather than paying 3, you're still paying 3, but it's not at the same time. It's paying 2 at one point and then 1 black whenever you need the spell. Starnheim Unleashed is a really cool one because, again, we've got foretell. So we basically get to choose. Do we want to pay 4 mana and create 1 4/4 white angel warrior creature token with flying and vigilance? Or do we want to foretell it and we can pay white XX, so for every 2 mana you pay after that initial white, you're creating an extra 4/4 angel warrior creature token with flying and vigilance. It's a super sweet card. It's really good in the deck despite us not having that much ramp. This is like a late game drop where you're slamming this and trying to, swing with 4 or 5 angels, preferably. That's 20 damage, 16 to 20 damage, and that should be enough to kill someone by turn, turn 10. Stormherd is in the deck because it's kind of fun. You make just a bunch of tokens. It's a 10 mana bomb, but you create X1/1 white Pegasus creature tokens with flying, where X is your life total. There's a little bit of life gain in this deck as well, just because we're in angels, we're in white. There tends to be at least some life gain in there. There's a decent amount in here. It's just part of what came with Kaldheim. So we're creating a bunch of Pegasi. We're creating based off of how much life we have, we're hoping that this is 40, and you're just swinging in with a crazy amount of Pegasus tokens. Lastly, for tokens that we're creating, we have Valkyrie Harbinger. It's got flying and lifelink for 6 mana, and just at the beginning of each end step, if you gained 4 or more life, you make a 4/4 with flying and vigilance. So talking about life gain, Righteous Valkyrie is our most obvious life gain source in the deck. There are a couple others, and I've already gone through a few of them, but Righteous Valkyrie is just whenever an angel or cleric enters the battlefield under your control, you gain life equal to its toughness, and then you get an anthem if you have 47 life or more. Remember, our commander is an angel and a cleric, so she would trigger Righteous Valkyrie as well. It's a really good early game drop if you can get it down. But we also have some drain here. Elves are one of the strongest creature types from Kaldheim. They're like their commander. Here, let me show you. Lathril Blade of the Elves came from Kaldheim Commander, and it's a really, 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 really good commander for elves, specifically with Kaldheim. So when it ETBs, you get to choose one, and I love these modal spells. Each opponent loses X life, where X is the greatest number of creatures you control with a common creature type, or you can gain life, where X is the greatest number of creatures you control that have the same creature type. So you're either draining people or you're gaining life. It's a really good spell because, well, what if we have Restoration Angel, and we're targeting a non-angel creature we control? This is a non-angel creature, and so it's entering the battlefield when you play it. It's entering the battlefield with Restoration Angel, and then maybe it dies, and we have Ascent of the Worthy. Return target creature card from your graveyard. It's now an angel as well. So there's multiple ways to get this back into the battlefield and just drain people, or if you need life, gain life, and just prolong your board state until you're in a place where you can actually win. There's a little bit of mill in the deck. Obviously, the commander's got mill. Firja's got mill, but Renegade Reaper is a really cool looking card, but it's also an Angel Berserker that ETBs and you mill 4. If you mill an angel, you gain 4 life. It's pretty simple. It's just an uncommon, but it's really good in the deck. Just to go through the ramp real quick, because I've talked about it just a little bit. Arcane Signet, Commander's Sphere, and there is a Soul Ring as well. So we've got the classics just in terms of mana rocks. We've got Mind Stone as well here too. I included Marble Diamond. It's not great, but there's a decent amount of white in here, and it was an option. There's just really not that much ramp in terms of the main set and then the commander precon. With that in mind, Goldvein Pick was also added because we're going to be attacking, and so getting the treasure token felt like it would be really useful. Dream Devourer is a really cool demon cleric just from the main set. He's a rare. Each non-land card in your hand without foretell has foretell. And then whenever you foretell a card, it gets +2/+0. So the reason this is in the ramp category is because you're casting, Valkyrie Harbinger not for 6 mana down here, but you're casting it for foretell or with foretell, and its mana cost is reduced by 2. So it's just easier to get some of those more expensive non-land cards out faster. Another one is Raider's Carve. This card is not that good. It's a vehicle. We've got a couple tokens that could potentially crew this, but when it attacks, if the top card is a land card of your library, you can put it onto the battlefield tapped. It's not great, but I really just needed some extra ramp because we do have some card draw in the command zone. Replicating Ring is actually a really cool artifact I hadn't seen before. I hadn't noticed it when I was looking through Kaldheim cards just a few other times I had, but it's a 3-mana mana rock. Add 1 mana of any color, which is pretty useful. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, put a night counter on it. If you have 8 or more, it breaks out into 8 colorless snow artifact tokens named Replicated Ring instead of Replicating Ring, and they all tap for 1 mana. So after 8 turns of having this on the battlefield, let's say you get this out like turn 2. By turn 11, you are now tapping these for 8, which is pretty good. It just takes a long time. But hey, a 3-mana, like any color mana rock is actually pretty solid regardless. You're likely never going to hit this, but if you do, even better. And then Starnheim Aspirant is just an obvious choice for the deck. Angel spells you cast cost 2 less to cast. There's also like the Starnheim Courser, but that's, I think, enchantments and maybe artifacts that cost 1 less. Didn't quite fit in the deck. It is a little bit of ramp, but it just didn't quite fit because we're not doing enchantments or artifacts that much besides our ramp. Before talking about card draw, I want to talk about the theft. So obviously I mentioned card draw is not great in this set, in this deck. So we've got a couple theft abilities. If a non-token creature an opponent controls would be exiled, or sorry, would die, exile that card with an ice counter on it. You can then cast those cards using mana of any color. So we're stealing stuff when our opponent's creatures die. Removes graveyard decks from being as much of a threat because he's exiling them, and then you get to play those cards. But then we've also got Tergrid, God of Fright. So at Tergrid's Lantern, we're really keeping people in check because we're constantly whittling down their life or forcing them to discard or /sacrifice cards, and they don't want to do that. So they're just going to be taking 3 life. But her front side's a little bit better for the deck, I think. Whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent, so against some of the sacrifice decks, this is going to be really good, but we also have some forced sacrifice. You can put that card from their graveyard onto your battlefield. So again, we're stealing cards from their graveyard. Really useful. Okay, back to card draw. So we've got some basic card draw options, although a lot of these you've maybe never seen before. So Ambition's Cost, 4 mana, draw 3, lose 3 life. Cosmos Elixir, beginning of your end step, draw a card if your life total is greater than your starting life total. So like with Righteous Angel, of course, that's our goal. So she works really well with Cosmos Elixir. Otherwise, you gain 2 life. Aegon, God of Death, is really cool. He's a 3-mana 6/6, which is really strong. He's got Death Touch, but at the beginning of your upkeep, you exile 2 cards from your graveyard. If you can't, sacrifice him and draw a card. To be honest, that card draw might be more useful than he is sometimes, but is worth including in the deck just because of how strong of a body he is. But he also has this artifact, Throne of Death. At the beginning of your upkeep, mill a card. You can pay 3 and tap it to exile a creature card from your graveyard to draw a card. So for 1 mana, if we really need the card draw, this is a super solid option to have should we need it. But if we need a body, it's also there. Pact of the Serpent is, I think it's only been reprinted 1 time, but it's pretty solid in creature type decks that have black. Choose a creature type, target player draws X cards and loses X life, where X is just the number of creatures they control of that type. So if you're playing against like an elf deck, you can cast this for 3 and hit them for like 20. But if you need some emergency card draw, it's also here because you're not going to have too many angels out on the battlefield unless you're casting some of the bigger spells that, you know, play multiple, create multiple angel tokens. Revitalize, it's a common from the main set, but when we need card draw as bad as we do, 2 mana, 3 life, draw card is not terrible. And then we've got these 2 runes. So then they're not great card draw options, but they do provide a little bit of utility outside of the card draw. When it ETBs, draw a card. If we can blink it, we can draw multiple cards, but gives our creature Death Touch, and then Rune of Sustenance gives our creature Lifelink. So both of these ETB, draw card, but they give Death Touch and Lifelink, which are solid stats. Skemfar Avenger is a little bit suspect, but we're running out of card draw options. Whenever another non-token elf or berserker, specifically what we care about is berserker, but we do have 1 more elf. Whenever one of them dies, as long as you control it, you draw a card and lose a life. That can be a lot of card draw if we do something like Rise of the Dreadmarn, where we have berserkers, but it hinges upon those things because our commander is neither an elf nor a berserker, so we don't have either of those just innately. And then lastly, we got Village Rites. Sacrifice a creature, draw 2. It's really solid, just it's a little bit rough in this deck because we're not really trying to sacrifice our creatures once they hit the battlefield. That's more of a Golgari elf synergy, but we are making some tokens and we do have some stuff that we can potentially get rid of as the game goes on, and we really need these 2 cards. So I realized while I was editing this that I had completely forgotten to talk about the removal section of the deck. I'm just going to talk through it real quick. Sorry about the jumble up. Okay, so under removal, Angel of Finality is basically Bajuka Bog on an Angel that costs 4 mana. You can exile someone's one player's graveyard. Angel of Serenity can be removal, or it can be graveyard recursion back to your hand. So in ETBs, you exile 3 other creatures from the battlefield or creatures from graveyards. So you can exile creatures from your own graveyard, and then it bounces them back to your hand when she leaves. This is a card where you can target her with Blink after she ETBs. You pull the cards back out of your graveyard, and then when she re-enters the battlefield, you can just target someone else's creatures, and then you've effectively removed them. Blood on the Snow is a board wipe that is combined with Graveyard Recursion. Cleansing Nova is actually a pretty good board wipe. Crippling Fear is a worse board wipe. It's conditional. Basically, they have to be 3 toughness. Doomscar is a board wipe that you can foretell. So if you ever have 3 mana just lying open, you can cast this with its foretell cost, so you can use it later for cheaper. Eradicator Valkyrie is forced sacrifice, which is kind of good for our god up here, Turgid. Firja's Retribution is cool because it makes you an angel token. You can then use angels by tapping them to just destroy target creatures, and then angels you control gain double strike, so it's a little bit of a win condition. Kaya gives you token creation, exiling target non-land permanents, and then you can make an emblem where you could basically cast spells for free on your upkeep. Poison the Cup you can foretell, so it's cheaper, but it lets you destroy a target creature. And then Rampage of the Valkyries is one of my favorite cards in this entire deck. This art is super badass, but when it ETBs, you make an angel token, and then whenever an angel you control dies, each player sacrifices a creature. So it's a little bit of a mean deck, or a little bit of a mean effect there, but overall, it's a really cool enchantment. And the last targeted removal is Sigrid God-Favored. So she has Flash, First Strike, protection from God creatures. There's a lot of gods just in Magic now, especially with Theros. When Sigrid enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 target attacking or blocking creature until she leaves. So a little bit conditional, but overall, not too bad. Anyway, back to the video. All right, we've basically covered all the cards within the deck, but there are a few lands to talk through just because we're using cards from the main set, and so our options in terms of what cards we have are pretty limited. So just to go through the basic land count: Command Tower, Myriad Landscape, Path of Ancestry, super basic. You've seen all these before if you've played Commander. Shimmerdrift Vale is specific to Kaldheim. It's a snow land that comes in tapped. Choose a color, and you add 1 mana of the chosen color. So if you need white or you need black specifically, it's good just because it lets you pick. Otherwise, it's not that good just in general. I chose basic snowlands because I needed to be sure that there was a couple snow synergies in the deck that could be triggered. And so basic snowlands were used. And then Snowfield Sinkhole is just our plains swamp. It comes in tapped, but it is a snowland as well. It's the Orzhov colors. It was the best option that existed. And then as for utility lands, Cryptic Caves isn't something I've really seen too much, but I actually think it's pretty interesting. Pay 1 and tap it to sacrifice this land, draw a card only if you have 5 or more lands. It's not particularly good, but it's emergency card draw in a deck that might need it. Faceless Haven can become a 4/3 creature with vigilance if you pay 3 snow mana. So if we need another body, we got another body. Otherwise, it's just a land. Great Hall of Starnheim is really cool. You can sacrifice it to create a 4/4 white angel warrior creature token with flying and vigilance. So again, if we need a body, it's an option for a body. Opal Palace. If you didn't have to pay 1 for this would be like $30, but add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity, and then if you use this to cast your commander, it comes with an extra +1/+1 counter. And then finally, Tyrite Sanctum. So you can turn a legendary creature into a god, put a +1/+1 on it, and then you can sacrifice this to put an indestructible counter on a god. So we've got a few gods in the deck, but we can also create a god and use Tyrite Sanctum to make it indestructible if we need to. So that's the deck. I really enjoyed building a Kaldheim specific deck around Firja and Angel Valkyries. It was a ton of fun, and building like set specific or plane specific decks is probably one of my favorite ways to build decks, just because there's so much innate synergy, but you also kind of have to include some cards that just aren't that good. And so you walk away with some weird synergies, but you walk away with synergies, and they're innately built into the set. So if you're ever wondering like what deck you should build next, maybe look at what plane interests you the most. For me, that's something like Alara. You can find a lot of different cards that do a lot of different things and are kind of wacky in terms of just their color synergies. So if you're interested in just weird and wacky commanders, make sure you subscribe. I've been doing this for the last few days and plan to for at least the next month. Peace.